So, welcome to our weekly conversation on the future of work, taken from the HCI CHI community angle. For this year, we do like these weekly conversations, which we record and chat to different people with different insights into the future of work. And for the 2022-2023 season, these are being co-organized by myself and my technical program co-chairs, which includes Erin Solovey, Navina Karasula, Toby Lee, and Shaden Shadigan. Apologies if I got any of those wrong. And also with the great help from our student volunteers, including Alberta and Ansa, who's working a lot behind the scenes, as well as Isabel and Nabil, who are doing web chair and video chair and accessibility functions. We also thank the National Science Foundation for partly funding this event and this series of conversations. So in terms of how we run this, we start off with a recorded part, which is a conversation between me and our guest for today that I'll introduce in a minute. And we're very much looking forward to your questions coming in as well. So please put those in the chat and we'll monitor those questions in the chat on the side. So if we want to bring those in when it comes to sort of a bit later on in the process, we can do. And then after a while, we'll stop the recording and then just have a bit of a more relaxed conversation for the second part. So I would like to welcome our speaker or our kind of discussion panelist for today, which is Ayse Kucukyilmaz. Ayse is an assistant professor in robotics and autonomous systems at the University of Nottingham. And she's got this exciting international track record working at lots of research institutions, including the Imperial and Technical University of Munich. And she now leads lots of the robotics research and curriculum that we deliver in Nottingham. Her research is focused on human-centered robotics, where she specializes in haptic, shared, and traded control for physical human-robot interaction. Her aim, from what I understand of the research, is to build adjustable autonomy within robotics so that robotics can dynamically shift between how they work with human users. And this would switch between full human control and full autonomous robotic systems, as well as having shared control over physical tasks. The idea being to sort out effective human autonomy teaming. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Ayse.
Thank you, Max. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So it's going to be exciting to talk about how robots are going to affect the future of how people work, or at least how the technology that's changing in robots affect it. So maybe you can start by helping to explain that a bit to us. And what type of work, or what future of work are you imagining that human-robot interaction has a big part to play?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on how we are actually imagining this should be. Because currently the robots, they have been affecting work life in quite many industries, especially in factories where the robots are behind cages and they do a lot of automation, doing our cars for us, etc. And the more mechanical devices have been used from 1940s when they are used as teleoperation for nuclear industries, etc. And we are now at a stage where now we are building robots that are more approachable. So this collaborative robot technologies, as we call them, are manufactured in a way that they are safer to work along with humans. So their velocities are slower. They have a lot of sensors on them, so they would actually understand the impacts and they wouldn't really hit something, or even if they touch something, they would stop. So they can actually physically coexist with us. So the idea of collaborative robots are getting more and more in these agile manufacturing scenarios right now, where you trade tasks with the robots, where they are doing maybe some of pick and placing and the person monitors them. So these kind of things are, I think, already there. And now most of the research is looking at how we can make them more and more intelligent, more and more collaborative. But I think the conversations that we are having nowadays is going to affect how these robots are going to take place in the future of work scenarios, I think, because many people are afraid still of robots, that they are going to take jobs. There's a lot of dystopic information in the media, in the more popular perspectives against or toward robots. And we will see how much people will accept them in their lives, I think.
So that's really interesting. So you're just talking about two aspects then, as far as I understand it, which you can tell me if I'm wrong, but a mixture between exactly how those robots work and how people can work with them, but also how robots affect the future of workforces. Is that right? Kind of like a social side.
Yes, I think they are interconnected, isn't it? Because the capabilities of the robots, as we see, opens a lot of venues for us, I think, to put the robots to take some jobs, honestly, because I think the robots are designed to take over some jobs from people. This doesn't really mean that they make humanity obsolete, as many people see, I think, because there are certain jobs that people really don't want to do. And robots have been very effectively used in such things. Nobody really wants to go 5 a.m. in the morning to do some kind of agricultural job, which is very physically heavy, or do these very heavy lifting tasks, which the robots are currently doing. However, the extent of what kind of applications we will see robots depends on how much people will accept them and how much the robots are able to actually make the jobs easier and more effective for people.
So forgive me, I guess I have another question, which is really what these robots look like that we're talking about, because we see in the news examples of humanoid robots which people have in their home, and we're seeing, I think some of the things you've discussed have been large kind of robotic arm type robots. Is there a particular area of robotics that you're focusing on, or is it including both of these?
Well, I actually focus on general robotics. So I have projects on robotic arms. So my projects focus on nuclear decommissioning, for example. We are trying to implement some intelligence mechanisms for making teleoperation more toward telerobotics in very extreme environments, in quite challenging industries as well. I work on mobile robots, where some of the rest of work I'm leading is more on shared control for wheelchair guidance, so assistive robotics, where robots can actually understand the human states and support them whenever they need. I don't do too much social robotics, but I have been involved in social robotics projects where we program robots to support children in hospitals, and now we are doing a lot of work in Nottingham in Cobot Makerspace, where we have different platforms. So I think the humanoid robots, as you say, for the future of work, maybe some of the last ones that we will see that will be in play. Because I think there are many applications, for example, with the arms in factory floors, etc. We will see much sooner. They're already getting into play right now, but having a robot enabling some form of social interaction is more difficult. So what we have currently is, for example, we have existing robots in possibly many people's houses right now that does vacuuming, because the task is very repetitive. It is actually quite easy, so that the robot doesn't have to do it perfectly, but make your life easier. And it is floor-based, so that you can cover the floor unless there are a lot of things on the floor, etc. There are robots which does delivery. For example, I think Korea has been quite successful in making robots deliver packages, etc. And there are some applications where in hospital floors, the robots are being used to deliver certain tools or kits or medicine in between departments. We are all familiar probably with Amazon's warehouses. So I think every year they are just reducing 20–30% of human workload and moving it to more robotic warehouses. And these environments are quite easy to work in because, for example, if you think about a warehouse where there's not a lot of need for human existence, you can put markers everywhere. You can make the life for the robot so easy that it can get increasingly autonomous and finish the job without really failing. And most of the humanoid kind of robots, which has faces, which are designed to interact with you, they are really designed to interact with humans, which means that they have to come into an environment which is designed for humans. And when they are designed for humans, there are, I think, a lot of aesthetic concerns we have being humans. And then we put things around, which makes life very, very difficult for robots because everyone is different. Everyone's office is different, for example. How would the robots work in my office, for example? Would it be able to generalize to your office? Even that kind of a thing is very, very difficult.
That's a very interesting spectrum of like, well, it's interesting what you're saying about the spaces that the humans aren't in being, at the moment, easy for robots. I was thinking of the factories I've seen robotics being used in, which include like car making factories. And they've often kind of got like a big cage around the robot. And if the human has to go in, they go in while the robot is not active, do something, and then they close the barrier and press a button. Then it's like, now you can do the robot job. So do you think that that's going to change as robots get more collaborative and I don't know, work a bit better with humans, or is it going to be that it will just change how people work separately in different spaces?
I think it is already changing. So currently, the mainstream, not mainstream, but the most challenging problems we are working in human-robot interaction, including myself, is on collaboration. So we try to look at really hard research challenges, which are very interconnected around how you can make meaning of the humans, their behavior around you, so that you can make robots a bit more aware of what's going on, to safely and proactively work along humans, and in the future possibly do some things when they are interconnected with humans. And these are, I think, in some ways already seen, for example, when you're using prosthetic devices or orthotic devices and you wear them, they are part of your body. They're not too intelligent, not too personalized in a way, in the sense that the software is written at the moment. But many people are working on developing this collaborative mechanisms, frameworks that makes robots to understand humans better. But also there is the other angle, that there is a lot of work on explainability, which is a little different than AI explainability. Explainable AI, when we refer to it in the robotics domain, where we try to refer to making the robotic actions more understandable by humans that are observing the robots, etc. And as these things are developed more and more, we will have the potential of having robots really much more closer to us. And this could be even in very intimate applications, such as social care, for example, and there has been a lot of social applications on putting robots to interact with the elderly. Sometimes just make people interact more through the mediation of a robot as well. But these are only possible if there is good cognitive architectures behind these robots.
So that's an interesting point, because to some extent there's robots making sure they don't physically damage a person by hitting them too fast, for example. And I guess we've all seen videos like that robot, the chess playing robot that crushed a boy's finger just putting a piece down. And but what you're talking about is more than that, and that's about the robot making judgments about the human And you said cognitive architecture. Is that a phrase, like a phrase we can learn more about?
Yeah, and coming back to the chess robot, actually, this is not a collaborative robot, which is funny, because the robot they selected is a industrial scale robot that you shouldn't actually put near humans without cages. So the selection of the robots was very poor. It shouldn't be near humans and shouldn't be near children in that kind of a distance. Typically, a collaborative robot could have stopped, but then again, there should be like safety layers, which would maybe understand that there is a person, like a field around the robot, and apparently that wasn't implemented. Which kind of demonstrates also that in some of the applications, people just don't have these safety mechanisms that we have to pass through as an industry when you especially deploy something in real life.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very surprising. It was very bad, I think, as a practice. So cognitive architectures is a phrase I used for referring to how robots build an understanding of humans around them, I think, including maybe environments, creating maybe bigger world models that may include multiple things. So the cognitive architectures in robotics is used typically for different purposes. So some part of it is more neuroscience-y, where we build cognitive architectures to mimic how human brain operates to perform tasks. For example, it can be connected to physical motion or learning, and then people implement robotic models to imitate learning so that you can maybe understand the human mind better, but also we do it the other way around to make robots a bit more capable. And robotic cognitive architectures are just the umbrella term that we use for those kind of modeling approaches that you put into the robot to make them more intelligent. And they can be similar to, for example, theory of mind approaches, like Marvin Minsky kind of things, where you have these beliefs, intentions, actions that refer to the human. They can be bidirectional, which is not really very much studied at the moment. And all of these things could contribute to the cognitive architecture we may want to build.
Interesting. So if these robots you're imagining in your research that they will try and make a judgment about whether the human is attempting to do something specific or is ready to do something specific? Is it that type of judgment?
Yes. So in my research particularly, I look at intention recognition, mostly at a kinesthetic level. So what we study is, for example, on very industrial tasks right now, because the projects that I'm leading are very industrial right now. We look at whether the human is handling a certain object and the human's intention is to maybe grasp that particular object, and the mechanisms that I develop on shared control or traded control just makes the robot become more autonomous when it understands the human's operation. So if you're trying to maybe reach an object, the robot can make it easier for you. And I'm probably referring to more tele manipulation kind of scenarios where you may think about yourself being in a remote space, handling something in a completely different room or a city even, and then you operate a device, possibly through a screen, maybe through VR, but that kind of a task is very difficult. So the robot tries to help you a little bit, and it could be through task distribution or making the movement a little bit easier for you, a little bit more transparent, just like lane assistance that the autonomous cars are doing. So they're kind of correcting without you noticing too much.
Right. So you feel like you've controlled the robot to pick something up, but really it's figured out where you're going for and made adjustments to get you there.
Yes, we can do those kind of things. And I think you know it better than me, working a lot with humans. We are very funny in how we attribute responsibility whenever we do something nicely, that we actually control everything. And I always think about like the car that I learned how to drive on. So it was so manual. I think the car that I'm driving right now, it actually does everything. And I'm still thinking I'm driving, whereas I'm actually not. So I don't have an autonomous car, by the way, not even close.
I'm intrigued by those ones where you like press a button and it parks. At that point, you're like, did I park or did the car park?
Yeah, just.
So, okay. So in my head, I was imagining people in factories kind of working in very close physical spaces where they, maybe the robot holds something while the human does something, or vice versa, sort of directly collaborative. Is that also the scenario you're imagining where the robot has to figure out what the human's trying to do, or,
Yeah, so some of the scenarios that I focus on is exactly as you described, and potentially it is because we have talked before. So one scenario is basically carrying objects together, and I always give this table carrying example, and I invite people to imagine yourself carrying a desk with me. So I call you and I have a heavy box or a table, and I ask you to actually put it in a different place in my office when we are redecorating, for example. And I really like that task because this is so intuitive that everybody's an expert on that, and then you can actually imagine how you're performing that task. And we know that we may talk and so on during the task, saying that I want to put the table at that corner. But after that initial agreement of this intense sharing, we don't actually talk, we just push things and then put it in a place. And that coordination is extremely natural, which is built through millions of years of evolution, where the robots are horrible at. So if you can't actually do that task with a robot. So most of the, for example, industrial scenarios we have, for example, a crane carrying the heavy load, and then you maybe correct the alignment, etc., which is a good solution, by the way. But probably it's not too appropriate for very agile scenarios. For example, work for SMEs or something like a small garage that fixes your car, who can't actually have these big crane systems, but they can have a mobile robotic arm, for example, that does the work with them, so that a person can work and install some of the, for example, the windshield of the car on its own. Or when you're at home, for example, I can't do many of the tasks without getting help from anyone, because there are all these very long objects. Or we changed the roof of our pergola the other day with my husband, and it was really very, very difficult, and you need two people, and it's very ergonomically difficult. So if you had a robot that actually is kind of maybe powerful enough for you to help you, those kind of things can be easier. And not maybe for domestic scenarios mainly, but I can imagine there are a lot of small businesses that require that kind of installation kind of jobs.
So then we're talking about dividing different things that the robot is good at versus the human's good at, as opposed to trying to both do something that you can't necessarily do well together.
Yeah, exactly. So this kind of goes on to this teamwork discussions we have been doing, isn't it? Because definitely there are things that humans are very good at, and there are things that robots are very good at. For example, they are precise, they don't get tired, they work 24 hours, etc. And then you can teach them potentially. So we have these mechanisms, learning methodologies where you hold a robotic arm, for example, but it can be done on a mobile robot too, where you teach them, this is how you do the task, for example, this is how you pour this thing. And then it would encode that trajectory to learn the physical task, and it can repeat it as many times as you like. But take it out of context, and the robot would be just clueless. So it would still require human decision making, maybe some kind of general task understanding, and so on, which we are actually better at, because as a mechanism, we get really tired very easily, and not very precise in what we are doing, etc.
So I'm thinking a bit about what that means for the human workforce, or the people doing their jobs, because they move away from doing physical labor to instructing something else to do tasks, or checking whether that something else has done the task. So is this fundamentally changing people's jobs when they're working with robots now?
I think yes, because there are, in order for robots to come into the workforce, we need, I think, different skills from humans, which we currently don't have, possibly. So this transformation comes with a transformation in the jobs of the humans. So people probably need to be a bit more literate about how these AI/robot mechanisms work, and possibly enabling that requires a lot of changes in the education system.
Interesting. I'm just imagining, like, I have enough trouble trying to get Alexa to do what I want it to do, which I guess is one aspect of it. If it's going to be you telling robots what to do, like, I don't know, change it like this or paint it a different color, or I don't know, whatever the task is doing, then I can only imagine the frustration of the task is going to be about learning the tricks of how best to get the robot to do what you wanted it to do, rather than the limited what it can have in conversation.
Yeah, but that is the thing, I guess, right? Because, for example, your example with Alexa is nice because you possibly understand what it's doing, and then in order for you to convince Alexa to perform something for you is through you manipulating it in the correct way. So you know what you should say because you probably know the capability of the underlying algorithm. So if I make it like too natural, it wouldn't understand me, but I have to probably label something and tell it to control it in clear words. And that kind of understanding has not established yet, because obviously the AI systems, they are really in our lives quite, maybe invasively, I could say even. But the robots are not. We don't really see robots, and understanding what they do, etc., or what they are capable of is something we haven't really established yet.
Yeah. There seems to be a range of challenges, that some of which would overlap with, I guess, interacting with non-robotic agents. So does your research involve studying those things about interacting with agents, or is it fundamentally different to study a kind of a physical robotic agent as opposed to a voice agent?
Yeah, my research is exclusively on interacting with physical systems. I think there are similar elements, or some elements that we use in robotics, adopting from other domains. For example, although I don't work, for example, in speech, in order to speak to a social robot, you need to integrate some form of speech recognition into it. And then typically people use some APIs and so on, and integrate it with the robot, maybe alter it to handle the nature of the task, etc. And there are, I think, different kind of things that you can do, although my research is more on the physical aspect. So I'm more interested in understanding sensory motor behaviors, how people use forces or tactile information to communicate, but also to collaborate. So I don't really use the off-the-shelf packages and integrate them in my applications. But robots do. For example, we do computer vision, and it's, for example, it has a lot of things common with computer vision that works on data sets, for example, that Google uses, for example, when you ask, is this a cat or a dog? So this is always the example, right? I wonder anyone is interested in that. But
so we want the
but
robot to pick up a dog.
yeah, just but yeah, we use similar algorithms. You do it in real time. You do it with much more noisy data, which are typically one step harder for the robots. So I think it's the ultimate AI application that you could tackle. That's why it's very challenging, but it's also very fun.
Yes, that's a good question for us to quickly finish on before we open up to the other questions that are coming in, because there's some in the chat that we'll get people to ask. So as a final summary, what do you see as the big challenges or the big main research questions that you want to address or you think need addressing by the broader community in terms of collaborative working with robots?
There are many. I think there is big challenges in cognition, which I say as the first thing, because that is my area of interest, obviously, to understand, to make robots understand and humans understand robots and the mechanisms behind them in a better way, to make them more collaborative, to get them to actually touch us and intelligently use physicality. So make them physically intelligent is, I think, very important. And that is one thing that is coming up. I think there are application related challenges which are very important. There is a lot of more multidisciplinary work going on in exploring what is the acceptability of robotic systems, which is not very technical, as I would say, but they are very important to actually understand what is the society's stance in response to the robots. There are a lot of key developments which are probably upcoming in different robot morphologies, especially on soft robotics, different materials, so that you can use those robots possibly in different applications, maybe implants or surgical systems, or robots that can actually handle constrained environments in a better way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things to be done.
It's exciting. Maybe at the end we'll look at some ways that people can find out more about these if they aren't in the HRI area. I know that Shaden has an interesting question she might want to ask related to interpreting body movement.
Yeah, it's not really a question. It was maybe so because we talked about this physicality and then the tasks of the robots being replacing the manual work, or basically motoric work requiring motoric movements. I was also thinking that the embodiment of the robots and its physical movements could be also an means for communicating different things like social communications. And I made this example of the dog robot shaking its tail. It's not even a humanoid robot. It's an animal robot, and then it's just using it for completely different means.
Yeah, no, that is very important. I think that also touches upon expressivity of robots, because we are very expressive, right? And then we expect people to be expressive. That is very culturally dependent, by the way. But I think there especially, I think Ayse Dragan had this thread of work, which was really nice, looking at legibility of robotic motion. So when a robot is coming, what it can do is it can very effectively solve the task. So if I have, let's say, two objects here, the robot, in order to reach this, should actually just direct its motion to this object. And if there are two objects, you can't actually understand whether it is going for this object or this object until it is very, very near. However, as a human, along with other humans, possibly what you would do is, if there is one object here and another here, if you want to make it really clear that you're reaching for this object and not this object, you would come from here and take it from the other end. And that's not very effective, but that is very effective in terms of the legibility of the motion. And there are those kind of expressive motions I think we need to implement if we want to have robots around us. Because, for example, one example was we were thinking about was robotic vacuums, because we have some projects that are coming up on vacuum cleaners. And what they do is they are so effective. They do like this thread of work. And sometimes they work in hotels and those kind of social spaces. And then they really are very disturbing, because when you're having a conversation, it kind of hits you almost, or like comes onto you, passes in between you. And sometimes the machines are kind of taller, not like the small ones that we use in our house. And that is socially very awkward, a machine coming to you, etc. So many people are also developing those kind of social behaviors on the robots, which I didn't actually touch a lot on, but there's this human-robot interaction aspect, which are very important. How do they actually function socially with us? And many people do embed human social norms onto the robots, which I don't believe is the correct way, possibly, because they are different, right? Our social norms for a dog is not the same as you, because it's a different thing that I conceptualize, possibly. And robots will have similar things, possibly, depending on the roles that they have. Is it like a pet application, or is it like a helper, or is it something that I should completely ignore so that it should make me forget about it? And those kind of things are quite interesting.
Yeah.
I guess there's quite a lot of body language, isn't there? And if you're going to pick something from someone's hand, you tend to kind of look at it first, which I guess the robot that's not necessarily going to move a camera towards looking at something to give you an indicator of them what it's going to do.
Yeah, but they do, like they have this, I think there's this active perception mechanisms that people use. Not active perception, but I think the use of gaze is very important. So there's a lot of work, which is not very recent even, that makes the robot look at the object that it wants to interact with and then take it. So it is more like game scenarios where that there are these cognitive aspects being developed in the robots, but you look at it and then you handle it, and that helps, because there's otherwise a poker face robot that does things, which is very, very awkward.
Yeah. Just imagine doing that myself, just like picking up a drink like this without.
Yeah, I always do that.
Andrew, you had a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to ask one of those before we move into the more relaxed kind of open conversation.
Sure. Well, you spoke a little bit about the size issue, and I was wondering about safety versus size, but also you mentioned acceptability, and so I'm kind of curious about what you see as maybe on the factory floor, a large one is perfectly fine. You're not getting close to it. But then you were talking about, presumably size and strength matter, right? So in your scenario of helping you in your, the roof, maybe multiple small robots wouldn't work. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are, small robots versus large robots. And what do you see as coming sooner rather than later? And some of these scenarios that involve the future of work, perhaps there's this, is it the factory floor, or is it maybe in other settings? So anyway, it's kind of a broad question, but I'll stop.
Yeah, I think factory floors, because there are already systems, and it is probably open to become a more like semi-constrained environment, are probably the more immediate applications that we will see. I think like an agile manufacturing scenario where the task is slightly changing and the robot is adapting to the changes in the task, etc., are ideas that people have been working on for quite a while. Surgical robots are already there, but they are like not really like robots. They are more like manipulators, which are controlled by surgeons, and we could make them more autonomous, but there are a lot of ethical issues to get that kind of a thing real, etc. And the size, I don't know. Size depends on the application, doesn't it? I think the bigger, the stronger. I think there's that kind of a relation. But for example, if you're doing microsurgery, you would get away with a small one. I don't know about, I never thought about that. But typically, for example, the collaborative robots that we have, they tend to be really quite, their payload tends to be very low anyway. So the bigger robots give you a bit of more flexibility in carrying objects, etc., when you're doing more meaningful tasks, possibly. But then if a person is actually handling it, touching it, and doing something with the robot in the same workspace, potentially a very big robot is, you won't be able to leverage the whole workspace of the robot because your workspace is limited. Although there, I don't know if this is a good answer or is the answer to your question.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
I can imagine in a limited workspace, like in a workshop, I would be much happier working with a little robot that I could pick up and move out the way than one that could pick me up and move me out the way.
Yeah. But also, again, like what you say is correct, because in some applications, you need to carry the robot. For example, there are often these conversations in rehabilitation that we are having nowadays, where you could have a rehabilitation robot that maybe helps a person do some repetitive tasks. A therapist could program it, and then it does the same thing without really taking a lot of therapist resource, which NHS in UK or worldwide, I think, doesn't have at the moment. So those kind of tools could be quite useful. But what would be the business model for those kind of things? Possibly the health organization would have a couple of devices and probably loan them. So you need to probably transport them quickly and leave it in a place for 1 week and then take it away, etc., depending on the needs. But it's an interplay of many things. With robotics, is just because they are also physical. There's a lot of design, looks, kind of concerns as well.
Yeah, I like it when robots are small and cute. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think we feel more comfortable, don't we? Because sometimes, for example, the robot arms, they can look quite industrial. So there are these universal robots which are gray, blue, which you possibly have seen. They look a little more industrial. And that kind of affects the impression. We had some events with some non-robotics people, and we were using this other type of robot, which is quite white, and the movement is very elegant, and they really liked it, although the underlying mechanism is the same in terms of what it is doing.
Yeah, interesting. The aesthetics of it. All right, so we should wrap up there in terms of the recording part. And I just want to say before we stop recording that next week's talk, Navina is hosting Palashi Vagela, excuse me for that, and that will be back at the normal time of 11 a.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. UK, and then whichever we translate to other time zones.